The Banking Scene Director's Cut goes behind the scenes, sharing stories and insights to help you build the bank of tomorrow.
Oh, Rick,
Andrew?
I'm glad you wrote this week's blog because I didn't get a chance to actually sit in for much of that session. Some of us have to run around during our events and make sure that the catering's okay and that people are coming and going and things like that. So unfortunately, I
That shouldn't
missed
be
out.
part of your role, though. Making sure people
It's
can find their way in and out at the last session.
It's always making sure that the customer has a great experience, which is aligned to what your panel was all about, from complexity to clarity and the experience of customers in today's banking world. And
Yes, but also specifically, after a lot of debate on new tech opportunities, how to make sure that adoption will go as well. Because without adoption, there's no success. Innovation fails if customers are not embracing it. And that's essentially what that conversation was about. And where I was also very happy to have a mix of both a senior banker, senior fintech representative, and then also an anthropologist, which is quite rare at this kind of conferences. So yeah, it was a great experience moderating, and it was a great learning, I think, for all of us in the room, except for you because you were running around.
yeah, well, at least I've got your blog that I can then refer to and find out what was going on. And, for techies like me, long in the tooth techies, we always get excited about the technology, right? So it's always embracing the next bit of technology. And maybe there's a cohort of us to which we think, what do you mean complexity? There's no complexity because we love all of this stuff. But I have to frequently remind myself that the average customer may not be that keen on embracing all kinds of technology. But that was actually one of the things that I think came through quite strongly was there's no more such thing as the average customer.
Yeah,
Or
and then
the-
it's also a discussion that comes up regularly, but I think today that becomes even more pressing than yesterday, because indeed we all have our mental luggage, we all have our own values, and that was also part of the conversation, for example, in Luxembourg, where we shared that the customer doesn't exist anymore, but also like cross-generational. You work with different values, but all representing the same capital. It's in a private banking context, but looking in a retail banking context, we have to bear in mind that me versus even someone from the same age as I am, will look at technology and technology evolutions differently. And some will love it, others will hate it. And there's a lot in between as well. And I think that was also part of the book that I wrote, The New Ethos in Banking, and the opportunity that I see for artificial intelligence today is that hopefully very soon we finally start to see some very concrete and successful examples of hyper-personalization, not just in terms of selling more to the customer, but also helping them better deal with their financial services or with the services offered by a bank, but in a very personal manner. Not just for the sake of cross-selling, but for the sake of better using the technology available.
I'm going to come back to the AI bit, one of my favorite topics. But before that, you mentioned generational and seen that we're two completely different generations. There was one soundbite that I picked up from there, and that was that everyone under the age of 50 is essentially digitally literate nowadays. I think was that Erin that had mentioned
Possible.
that? Anthropologist. And when you think of that, we
But that was also
rapidly,
a specific region.
it was in a specific region, but essentially, I think everybody under the age of 50. So when it comes to generational, digital literacy is no longer a thing. I think a couple of years ago, that was a big thing that,
It still
older
is.
generations.
I saw a recent, because we had a couple of sessions on digital literacy at the banking scene after work.
Mhm.
And I saw an update, I think last week, with the most recent numbers stating that 40% still at risk of being digitally excluded. Now, of course, it's
Wow.
both on a literacy basis as well as having the tools available. But I think like digital literacy in the context of the blog and the panel back at the Bank Scene Conference Amsterdam was about we assume that everyone below 50 knows one way or another to deal with digital, because without that you are simply societally excluded. But of course there are different levels. And that conversation was very vivid a couple of years ago, but still is today.
I'd be interested to know the source of the 40% or so of people are
It's
still
the
at
same
risk
source
of
we
being.
discussed a couple of years back. I think it's a study by the Koning Boudewijn Stichting. Yeah, I'll have a look at it.
That was Belgium related.
Belgium.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's interesting, because from my perspective, I usually perceive Belgium to be quite advanced in terms of just countries in general. So that number, that's quite a shockingly high number. However, you also mentioned context. And again, I'm staying away from the AI part of it or the technology part of it at the moment, where Erin had said that context is very important, that even
Of course.
in terms of some of the studies that she had done as an anthropologist, that people choose different instruments and ways to pay depending entirely on their perception of whether or not something is going to work better. And she was mentioning that in the context of fraud, where some people strongly perceive digital to be less safe than handling cash when it comes to fraudulent transactions, and other people perceive digital to be the only way to get. So even though we in financial services might believe we're doing the right thing and we are providing the right context, all of that is in the mind of the consumer. What do you think that means for people creating new products and services that firmly believe, this is going to help the consumers be safer in the way that they do transactions? Pick up on that from something like verification of payee and the conversations that we've been having around the fraud research for the white paper that we have just published. The banking industry, even the regulator, has said.
I think there's a reason why, Andrew. I think there's a reason why we put such an emphasis this year at the fraud stage on the psychological element of fraud. And it also like to look back at the Bank Scene Art Night, because Lisa Russell, one of her key statements was that we need more narratives in financial service adoption. And that is exactly what that is about. If we can pivot the conversation, the story around certain new solutions, etc., we also help shape the context in which a customer feels trusted with new solutions sometimes, or maybe not. But the key message from Erin was also that we need to provide multiple tools so everyone can find their preferred tool in a way. And that means that the overall idea of rationally there must be one best solution that fits all probably doesn't exist, because you prefer to pay with your ring while I prefer to work with my phone. Others prefer to work with cash perhaps, or with a card or whatever. And that has to do with habits, that has to do with context, that has to do with experience, that has to do with so much more. And as a bank, as a financial institution, as a provider of financial services, we need to keep that into account, because that's a customer choice, and customer choice should be key in providing financial services in a way.
I think that was another interesting point that you had raised, where in the past, potentially, people have sought to remove complexity by simplifying things. But what came out of that panel is that complexity also implies choice, and the customers need choice. They want choice. So I think there is a bit of a rethink from a lot of people, where oversimplification might lead to a lack of transparency, which then might impact trust. And that was something that came out of what Wise are doing. When Laura had said their proposition is all about full transparency. You know exactly what you're going to get, and people trust them because of that. Before you do a transaction, there's a full breakdown of everything there. So it's not about simplifying everything and saying, you're going to transfer some money. Here's how much the other person will get. And you go, what's that all about? That the
I think in the
complex.
context of Wise, it's more complex than that. And maybe we haven't touched upon that enough in the panel. And you, as a former Wise user, could perhaps fill part of the gap. But they are active in a very complex environment, cross-border, ethics, etc. And the narrative in the panel was a lot on we bring transparency in the fees, which is to me only one part of the complexity in cross-border payments. All the rest is about making sure that you keep that complexity at the back and only confront the customer with the essential elements key to make sure that you can successfully have the credit transfer. That is something that we haven't touched upon that much. The key selling propositions seem to be more on pricing, but nevertheless, I think, and hearing it from you, they're doing quite a good job there.
Well,
So you have different kinds of complexity. Some can be very transparently listed, explained, etc. And in some cases, you may just need to hide part of the complexity to make sure that people embrace it without any worries. On the other hand, today, and that links back to probably another element that you want to talk about, the friction versus frictionless. In some cases, friction will help grow confidence by the end user, because they feel they have a choice, or because they feel that there's a bank that is worried about transactions they do, or because any other reason. And that makes me think about, it was a learning at Finovate where I said, that was an interesting insight from an AI speech, and where you said, yeah, but that narrative exists already for so long. Was it about pancake? No, it was about cake, making cake by adding eggs and milk.
yes, yeah,
Instead
that
of
was
only milk.
when the instant. That's an old example of
Exactly.
when the first convenience, when the first instant cake mixes were released. They didn't sell well at all because all that the people making the cake had to do was add water. Everything was in there, and they didn't sell well. This was factual. You know, they've got the statistics, and then they changed the recipe, and you had to add 1 egg and a cup of milk to the mixture to make the cake. And suddenly the cake mix took off because people thought, oh, I'm making a real cake. I'm just putting in the mix. So you are right. And again, that came through very clearly in a number of our interactions during our fraud research, where intelligent friction is necessary part of banking to increase trust in a number of cases. Not all friction, but intelligent friction. Picking the moments at which a little bit of friction will increase the customer's trust in doing something. And, you know, we had lots of conversations around maybe instant payments should have limits and things like that, because there's not enough friction, not enough time for people to change their mind about a transaction, or maybe call something into question. That was the word I was looking for. But I've lost my train of thought now, because there was something that Wise, interestingly, completely side anecdote. I went up after your panel, and I was chatting to Laura from Wise and her colleague, because I am a long-term Wise customer from the days when they were called TransferWise, and I still am a Wise customer today. And they were
Wise guy.
Wise guy. They were very disappointed to hear that I am also a Monzo customer, and I use Wise as well as using Monzo. And they have spent a lot of effort embedding Wise's services seamlessly into Monzo. But I don't use Monzo for cross-border transactions. I use Wise. I choose to use Wise. And they were looking at me
another one, no?
for which I use Starling for business. I use Starling for business, but for my personal, I use Monzo and Wise. Okay. And they looked at me and they went, but we don't understand. We've gone to all this trouble of embedding Wise inside Monzo. You get exactly
they did it all for you.
No,
But
they
we
were
don't
curious.
understand, Andrew. Why did you do that?
They were just really curious, and they said, "But why? We don't understand why you do it." And I said,
Let
"But
me talk to your mom.
I know that Wise position for me is cross-border. It is the cheapest, fastest way I can do things. And there is no extra cost in me transferring from Monzo to Wise and then making the international payment Wise." And they turned around and they said, "But you can make it directly from Monzo." And I went, "Yeah, it doesn't feel right making it from Monzo. I put it into Wise and then it can go anywhere in the world in any currency that I want, almost. It's got a lot of different ones. But when I do that from Monzo, I'm not so sure that I'm going to get the same experience." And they were just shaking their heads going, we just don't understand why you would make a choice like that. But that's
I
where
can
it comes
imagine
down
you
to
sitting
choice.
there in front of a team of 15 people from Wise trying to find out how your thinking goes.
Well, and maybe that is when we were talking about customer choice. I choose to take a route that they don't expect Monzo
Why,
customers.
Andrew? Why do you do that?
Compartmentalization and context, which goes straight back to your blog and your panel. To me, I didn't want the simplification of it all being in Monzo. It's too easy in there, if there's such a word there, and I like the absolute separation. I am being paid, or I am going to pay into a currency that is not my standard currency. That equals to me, that happens in Wise. Doesn't happen in my bank account. Now, maybe I will change. And I did throw them some curveballs where I explained to them what I need Wise for to receive payments was a international IBAN in certain jurisdictions. And they went, "Yeah, we haven't got that in Monzo yet." Okay. So they accepted my small use case, but it does go back to that choice. But we are going to talk now about AI agents and
Oh,
the
sorry,
agentic.
we don't have any time anymore. It's 20 minutes.
No. We can, because there was a point that you had made that the banks have been trying to own the customer journey in the past, and the banks have designed journeys, any form of a financial journey, on the basis of they own the journey and the customer interacts and becomes part of that journey. But increasingly, that journey extends way before and way after the bank, and the customers dip in and out for certain parts of that journey. And more we're getting agentic being spoken about, agentic commerce, AI agents. I read something on LinkedIn today about some new protocol now to do credit brokering inside Gen AI agents and things like this. There's some new protocol that's being announced today. The customer that banks have been dealing with in the past, a human customer, as we saw from Peter van Heer's presentation, is going to change. That is going to be an AI agent. The bank will deal with my agent for certain parts of my journey to begin with. It won't deal with me for all the parts of the journey. And I think that's
It
going
was
to
the same
become...
promise with open banking 5 years ago, of course, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Platforms will take care of the customer instead of customers. We'll see.
And
Yeah. We haven't seen much of it.
are we there yet?
I don't know. There as well. It may go very, very fast, but I think a majority of customers isn't ready right now to deal with agents. Future will tell for how long, of course. And I do see an opportunity for agents to make open banking, open finance more successful than what it is today. But it is, it's an incredibly complex environment. And the average customer may not be ready for that anytime soon. But again, I don't know for how long. I don't know. I mean, the one-click pay is also incredibly complex at the back, but very convenient in the front. Maybe the same will happen with agents. We'll see. But there as well, banks need to be ready for catering to the needs of different kind of customers. And some will be moving rapidly. Others will forever prefer a branch. And I'm not saying you need to cater to all those needs, but to a certain level, I think we're going to get more diversity before we get to similarity when it comes to serving customers.
So how would you like to wrap up a single bit of advice that came out of your panel for the bankers out there? What is something that you would like them to think on very hard as they plan their next product offerings or customer journeys? What should they be adding to their list to do or thinking hard about? Bit of advice from an industry observer there, Rick.
I think buy a bunch of tickets for the Banking Scene Conference Brussels would help a lot. And aside from that, on a professional note, make sure your colleagues join as well. But
because we will be talking about all of this at the Banking Scene Conference.
But also, like, talk to your customers, listen to your customers without bias from the start. Be there, listen with a very open mind, because the way your mom looks at financial services is not the same as you look at financial services. The way your friends look at financial services will be different than compared to how you look at financial services. So make sure that you grasp that diversity, that you become a proper mirror of society in building the right financial services and products. That is, I think, a very important one. And from an anthropological, from that perspective, make sure that you keep in mind that their context is different than your context. That success in the Netherlands may not be success in Belgium and the other way around. That even success in one city may not be as successful in another city. And that is all about context. That is all about, personalization of service and advice, I think. And that will be incredibly more important in the future than it is today.
So there you have it, from complexity to clarity, why banking needs better conversations, not just better technology. And to have those better conversations, join us at the Banking Scene Brussels on May the 28th.
Now you're selling too much here. Now you're doing too much effort to sell tickets.